Were the wage rate analysts primarily women?
Yes, I think there were one or maybe one man, probably a 4F, I would guess. Excuse me. Otherwise, we were all women.
And the secretaries?
Secretaries, too,
Were
were all women.
So did you learn to give dictation to
Not-
your to your former?
I think I
sorority?
did. Though, of course, sometimes there might be another one there, but yes, I did. I'm trying to remember now whether I don't know that I had a typewriter, so that I finally, I think, would write it out and give it to her. I just was never comfortable.
It sounds as if it was a place where women were treated professionally, and
Oh, yes. Yes, we all had, well, it came down from the government what we were going to be paid.
you didn't negotiate your salary or.
No. Not in those days. That was the way it was set up.
Was it mainly white women?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And
And mainly college educated for this wage rate?
yes, we were all at about the same level.
And age, about the same age? Or?
Yes.
So you kind of relatively young women are going out to the businessmen in the community
Yes, we
and
were.
telling them how much they could pay their workers.
Yes,
how did
we
that,
were.
How did that
Yes, we were.
work?
They had to listen to us. You know, it really, there was no way out. We were in control.
Interesting.
And,
Do you remember any encounters besides the man in the bank?
oh,
Oh,
yes,
so-
I used to have to speak to groups of businessmen in their conferences about the War Labor Board and what we were doing. And I remember one, I think it was in Portland or someplace, I had to travel to it. I'll explain to you travel in those days. And there was a certain amount of levity and drinking and all, but I stood up at a podium and explained the whole thing to this group of men. Then I had to stay overnight. And I remember one of the men he would come to the door and he would knock on the door and he'd, Miss Kleiner. And it was really, disturbing. So I told the man, I think he was the head of it, who had sort of taken me over in a way, because he had introduced me and taken me out of to the airport or wherever it was. And I told him, and he was very upset with this too. And he told this man that he had, been out of control. But he did keep an eye on me. Now, in terms of, yes, I did quite a bit of this kind of speaking. And I did it in the orchards. I had to go to and in the fishing industry.
Oh, you did fishing and
yes, so I would
agriculture,
go
too.
from one kind of thing to another.
And did you have to learn about that industry? Yes.
You learned whatever you could. You learned it really from them. They would come, they would talk to you. And yes, I went down to somewhere in Oregon and watched it was all women, gutting fish and getting them ready for the fish market. It was awfully difficult work, cold, and their hands were cold. These olive fish were just coming out of the water.
Yeah.
They needed a raise.
And were they pushing for the raise or their union?
Yes, sometimes it was a union. Sometimes it was. And sometimes
So they would apply for their workers?
Yes, they would. And they used to have to apply, I think, through the head of their office or their business. But yes, with respect to the unions, yes. And I did fishery. I went into the orchards where they were picking apples out of Yakima. Sometimes in the spring, and it was just gorgeous. The apples were blossoming, and they're close to the eastern part of Washington where the mountains are just beautiful. They're on the other side of the Cascades. At that time, I think I had won a contest of some kind and had one of these little old movie cameras, a little 8-point movie camera, and so I remember taking pictures, moving pictures when I had the time in the orchards. So I dealt with the pickers in the industry. I also dealt with the people who dug potatoes.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize this.
Yes, we did everything. I did the fisheries, I did potatoes. I must have been in charge. I must have been dealing with agriculture at that time. Potatoes, I remember.
Was any of the pressure to raise the wages coming from the employers because they needed to attract workers?
Yes, they did. They needed that. And in terms of the merchant marines, with whom I had wonderful altercations.
Oh, were they also under the wage stabilization program?
Yes. There you had a very decided problems. You had the head of the companies who owned these ships. You had the ship owners,
right,
and you had the people who worked, and they were Seattle particularly, and
they must have had a strong
and
union.
seafarers were very. That was a union town. In fact, the whole coast was heavily union when it came to sea people,
right,
to people who worked in the water and ships. Longshoremen, that's all history. We all know that. One of the union people was a graduate of Reed College. I didn't really realize that. I think he graduated some years before me. And he was strongly on the union side, strongly on the left. And this was a real problem. So, of course, that went to the attorneys.
Right. Well, tell me about, you said you had quite an encounter. Tell me how it went, if you remember.
Well, because they just were at loggerheads. And so, Roger.
Ship owners didn't want to raise the wages?
Oh, no. Or as much as the union wanted.
And you had
we
the
had
task
our,
of keeping it within the
we
brackets.
had our boundaries. The only way you could go beyond those was through the attorneys. And they would make the final decisions. So, of course, that was one that went to the attorneys.
Was there any general feeling on the War Labor Board from Noble or Clark Kerr that was favorable towards the labor
I don't think
interests?
so. I think they were really quite neutral. And we were all had to be neutral. We could understand problems, but we had our formula. And while you may, of course, feel that probably they deserved a little more, and sometimes you might have even given them a little more, but you always had a little, there was a little elasticity, but not much. So it seems to me that I sort of roamed around quite a few industries.